18. The moon. Rain whipped the deck as the ship lurched forward, sending all but its hardiest sailors tumbling, scrabbling to find their claws, or hooves, against the slick deck, soaked with brine, seaweed, and a few unfortunate sea creatures that struggled in vain and gasped for their final breath. Lester delicately stepped over a bubbling clump of red seaweed, and gently kicked a flopping salmon across the deck and back into the ocean, a small smile turning the corner of her mouth upwards as she saw it disappear over the side. After 3 days, she had finally found enough of her sea hooves that would permit her to walk on the deck during the day without constantly vomiting over the side. Characteristically, Cozy had acclimatized to the sea almost immediately, and had been her saving grace in those worst hours when she had been capable of little else than curling into a ball in her quarters and whimpering, bringing her lunch and patting her awkwardly on the back. Lester wasn't sure she'd have made it without her. Aircraft, balloons, airships, flying chariots, were a rare sight in the Griffin Empire, as the Ubazi had gruffly informed her when she'd expressed surprise at the prospect of sailing to Equestria. Apparently being raised as a spoiled little Canterlite had warped her expectations. In truth, she'd been lucky enough to be afforded her own bunk, a luxury only extended to her because of Cozy's presence. All the other mages were sharing communal halls with the Griffin sailors, an unpleasant prospect to say the least. To keep her occupied, she'd begun to devour every tome on magical warfare she'd been able to lay her hooves on before she departed, hoping she'd never have to use any of it. She'd heard nothing more from Discord since his last appearance, and had firmly resolved to put him out of her mind. Maybe it had all been a part of some cruel prank, one last dig in the ribs before the world descended into anarchy. It would perfectly fit his sense of humor. The sound of thudding limbs against the wooden deck caught her ears, and she turned around with a small grin on her face. Books weren't the only thing she'd bought along.
Doing all right, Eula?
Eula shook herself vigorously, sending water spraying across the deck as she burst into a wide smile of her own.
Amazing! Yasha's still downstairs being sick, but he'll feel better soon. Eula missed being on a boat. So exciting.
With almost every word, she jumped up and down in excitement, shaking the ship violently and earning her several glares from the sailors on deck, though none dared challenge her. Ambling forwards, Eula rested her weight against the railing, which creaked in protest.
How much longer you think before we in Ponylands? Another day, probably. If even that. Everything. The air, the climate, the feel. It's all feeling more like home. Pony must be.
Eula stopped, as if unsure what to say.
Not excited, but Pony must be feeling strong feelings.
Lester laughed, unable to help herself.
That's one way of putting it. When I last left Equestria, I had nothing to lose. I never thought I'd be returning, and certainly not like this. But here I am. Life's funny like that.
Eula nodded, smile fading slightly.
Pony didn't lie when she says she'd take Eula around world. Eula want to say thank you. She knows Pony make mistakes, but that not matter anymore. Pony only doing what she thinks best of Cozy. That all that matters. Thanks.
The words came out a little tighter, a little colder than she had wanted. Eula seemed to notice, and quickly changed the subject.
Maybe Yasha and me settle down in somewhere in Equestria. Not like Halcyon. Somewhere quiet, somewhere far away from Yakyakistan. That sounds nice. You deserve some peace after everything you've been through.
Peace. Her stomach flipped as she recalled Discord's words.
Eula, what do you think about this war?
Eula looked at her as if she was simple.
What I think? War. Bad. War kill creatures, burn homes, starve young. She not understand why so many yaks like it. She not understand why Yasha like it. She hope this all over soon. I see.
Lester wasn't sure what she had been expecting, but she couldn't turn back now.
But how? How would you prevent it? War, I mean. How can you stop different countries fighting, especially these days?
Eula paused, then took a deep breath of salt air before replying.
In Yakyakistan, there are many tribes. Long ago, these tribes fight. They fight all the time. All the time. Old tribes being wiped out, new tribes being created. Lot of wars between tribes who were won only a few decades ago. But slowly, Yaks see world getting smaller. More ponies, more griffins, more hippogriffs. Yaks worried they have to fight outsiders. So all tribes joined together. Elect a king. A king? Just like that. Well, not like Pony Princess. King let tribes be, not tell them what to do or how to act. But no more fighting other tribes. Two tribes have problem. They go see king. Sort it out, peacefully.
Lester had a feeling she knew where this was going.
What if a tribe did start a war? Other tribes attack them too. Wipe them out, bull, dry and calf. After first tribe break rules. No more war.
Catching sight of Lester's queasy expression, Eula grunted noncommittally.
Not pleasant, but it how things were back then. Today, there are no wars between Yak tribes. Yakyakistan peaceful place. Still cold and boring, though. But why not just put the tribe leaders on trial?
Eula sighed.
It not work like that. Their calves just take over and keep fighting harder than ever. Some Yaks rather die than submit. Eula not like admit it, but sometimes there are tribes the world better without.
Lester couldn't pretend she wasn't outraged, but she had very little room for judgment. Where? There those the world was better without? She'd seen enough of the Griffins to know they were a brutal lot, but some of them were kind enough. How could she pass judgment on an entire race without discrimination? But when she'd heard the guttural, growling voice of the Emperor on the radio, she'd known it could only belong to a twisted being of pure evil. Every one of the Griffins worshipped their Emperor like a god, the same way ponies had worshipped Twilight, the same way many of them probably worshipped Gallus. How could she possibly hope to win their trust after striking down their heroes? Eula must have caught sight of the grim look on her face, because the next thing Lester knew, she was being walloped on the back by what Eula must have thought was a comforting pat.
Want to tell Eula what bothering you? Nothing. Eula, I was just thinking.
Morningstar surveyed the carnage around him with a dulled sense of satisfaction. The skies burned black above the scorched battlefield, where the Crystal Legion had been forced back into the inner sanctum of the palace, whose thick crystal walls would offer little protection when the next siege began. He took in a deep breath, taking in the smell of ash and flame mixed with the stench of blood, thick and metallic, that he knew so well. It would have been a challenge to find even a square meter of the ground that wasn't contaminated with the substance. Such had been the ferocity of the fighting and the steely resolve of those they faced. All in all, he had barely more than half of the force he had arrived with, but he suspected the opposing side had fared far worse. At least 2,000 must have fallen in the past 6 hours, and many more had doubtless succumbed to their mortal wounds behind the walls of the sanctum. The 100 or so who had attempted to surrender had, true to his word, been shown no mercy. Tens of thousands of citizens had also fallen into their hooves. Despite his earlier threats, Morningstar had been quick to assure that they had been well cared for, offered food, water, medicine, and fair treatment. The sooner they accepted their position as new citizens of Equestria, the better. He had no idea how many more laid within the bounds of the palace, but already several hundred had fled to throw themselves at the hooves of his soldiers and beg for mercy. More would surely follow. He wouldn't be surprised if Flurry Heart had an insurrection on her hooves at this very moment. It was a hard-won victory, but a victory nonetheless. Within hours, his army would crush the last resistance and take back the Crystal Empire. At last.
General.
The lieutenant bowed deeply as he landed next to Morningstar, who merely raised an eyebrow.
Yes? We've had an envoy from the palace, sir. It's the princess. She wishes to discuss terms of surrender.
Now, that was a surprise. Morningstar yawned callously and shook his head in disgust.
Come to her sense at last. Tell her she'll have to meet us here if she wants to beg for mercy. No, sir. It's the princess.
Florrie Hart knelt in front of Morningstar, a miserable look on her face. She was missing her royal crown and adornments, and there were deep, dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there a few days ago. The general, perched on a chair in his tent, eyed her with suspicion.
I surrender. You have bested me and my legion. I won't hold out till the bitter end, only to be slaughtered in my own throne room. Nor will I beg to be spared. I only ask that you show my people mercy and offer my legion a chance to lay down their arms peacefully.
Her voice wavered slightly as she spoke, and pinpricks of tears began to form in her eyes. Morningstar said nothing. Beside him, the lieutenant leaned in and whispered into his ear.
It's her, sir. We checked, and she's not a changeling or wearing a cloaking spell. I had to guess. Her soldiers have turned against her. It wouldn't exactly be a surprise.
Morningstar nodded slowly, then turned his attention back to the kneeling princess.
I'm surprised by your sudden display of courage, but I accept your surrender. As you request, I will offer your soldiers 1 chance to lay down their arms. Any that refuse will be killed. As for you...
He let the moment sit in the air for a second, enjoying the tension.
You will be returned to Canterlot and put on trial for your crimes. The Crystal Empire and its land will be reunited with Equestria, and harmony will be forever restored. Have you any more to say?
Florrie Hart couldn't stop the tears now.
I'm so sorry. F for everything. I thought I was. Spare us your sniveling, traitor.
The lieutenant snapped, voice contorted with genuine disgust at the weeping alicorn before him.
You betrayed your people to a foreign nation of slavers for nothing. You will be known forever to history as a coward and a collaborator, as you deserve. Thank you, Lieutenant.
Morningstar's even voice silenced the Pegasus instantly.
Victory is ours at last. Take her away and send an envoy to whatever remains of the Legion. I doubt they'll refuse, but rally the troops to fight in any case. We should stick a spear in her right now. Sir, it's what the Regent would want. The Regent wishes to see the princess sit trial. You are dangerously close to insubordination, Lieutenant. It would be a fatal mistake to lose my favor after your sterling conduct during this campaign.
The lieutenant grumbled, but dutifully seized Florrie by the wing and dragged her out of the tent, kicking her when she didn't move quickly enough. Morningstar sighed and rose to his hooves. What a climax! He should return to Canterlot at once, throw himself at the claws of Gallus and beg for mercy. Conquering the Crystal Empire was certain to impress, but his refusal to obey orders would be the more pressing issue by far. In a few hours, he could have the princess loaded onto a chariot with a small bodyguard and be on his way. He would appoint one of his lieutenants to lead the siege to victory. His sense of elation at his victory was numbed slightly by apprehension. Gallus might well decide to have him hung for his abandonment, but who cared what Gallus thought? He was unhinged. It was only a matter of time before somebody stuck a knife in his ribs when he wasn't looking and took the throne for themselves. A returning war hero, for example. Shaking his head, a cruel smile played its way onto his lips. It was a tempting idea, but he had no desire to play politician. Besides, it wouldn't be long before one of his own subordinates decided to do the same. Levitating his ceremonial astral barding onto his back, he took a moment to admire himself in a nearby mirror. He looked the very picture of a hero. How could Gallus throw him to the dogs? After everything he'd achieved, he was safe, he had no doubt. Fastening his barding in place, he strode from the tent and began to bellow orders.
Golden sun, Golden, come quick.
Cozy pulled incessantly at the mare's forehoof, dragging her towards the brow of the ship, grumbling under her breath. More amused than irritated, Luster allowed herself to be dragged by Cozy until the filly came to an abrupt stop, gesturing frantically into the horizon. As her eyes adjusted to the darkening skies, Luster spotted what had gotten Cozy so excited. Her stomach tied itself into several knots as she took in the looming landmass that could only be Equestria.
It's at home.
Cozy breathed the words with a pious reverence that seemed to drain all the breath from her lungs.
I can't believe I'm really seeing it again. Me neither either.
Luster murmured. Cozy glanced back up at her, a concern crumpling her muzzle.
It'll be okay, won't it? We'll be fine. Of course.
Luster ruffled Cozy's mane, unable to tear her gaze free from the horizon.
We'll be with the Griffins the whole time. Even if we do have to go deeper into Equestria, you'll have your amulet.
In a few weeks, it wouldn't matter anyway. As soon as Discord returned with the bewitching bell, she'd have the power to put a stop to this war once and for all. In fact, with the bewitching bell, she could do whatever she wanted. She could give herself and Cozy new lives.
I'm not afraid,
Cozy muttered unconvincingly.
I'm not sure how I feel. Are you looking forward to being home? It doesn't feel like home anymore.
Cozy sighed.
Everything's changed. I just wish everything could go back to the way it was.
Back to the way it was. What a wonderful thought.
I miss Canterlot. I miss teaching. I was so happy then, even though I thought I was miserable. I just didn't know how bad things could get. Even Tartarus was better than this.
She shook her head slowly, as if it might clear her mind.
Will you be leaving me when we get there? To go and fight? I don't think so.
Luster smiled.
I'm pretty sure they just want me to stay behind and work in a lab. With any luck, the war will be over soon and we can both go.
She stopped herself before the word, home, could pass her lips.
I just wish this war could be over, now. I wish Princess Twilight could be here. She could have stopped this all from happening.
The words were like a knife, raking themselves across Luster's heart, but she fought to keep a level head. Cozy clearly didn't realize the effect her words had had on her.
Me too, Cozy.
And, of course, she was right. This war should never have happened in the first place. In an instant, Luster felt a surge of anger flood through her. First Eula, now Cozy, and both of them were right. All of this misery wrought by greed and ambition. It all came down to a corrupt few. Gallus, the Emperor, even Flurry Heart wasn't innocent. With no princess to keep them in check, this was the profit of their enterprise. And yet, would she be any better? She was far from perfect. She'd made mistakes, done things she wasn't proud of, always for the right reasons, as if that made any difference. If she'd just kept a level head with Twilight. If she'd just kept Cozy at hoof's length and not gotten too involved. If she'd just had the good sense to turn down the task in the first place. As much as the fact repulsed her, she bore the brunt of the responsibility for this sorry state of affairs. But if not her, who? Flurry Heart? She seemed an obvious choice, but she had been quick enough to side with the Griffins, and, from what she'd heard on the radio, all for nothing. The guilt was unbearable. She'd never shake it off. It would almost certainly follow her into the grave. Discord had been right. Better to intervene as little as possible, and wash your hooves of what may come. The Griffin's eyes glinted azure in the dark shadow that enshrouded his throne. A long, elaborate, crimson coat fell from his shoulders like fluid and spilled out onto the floor, making him seem twice as large as he was in reality. Every few seconds, his eyes bulged uncontrollably, and there was an ever-present tremor in his right hoof. Morning Star approached slowly, head bowed in deference. For the first time in recent memory, he was terrified.
Regent Gallus, I have returned.
No response. Gallus let out a deep breath, then cocked his head to one side, inviting the general to continue.
I will not insult your intelligence. I admit, I ignored your orders to pursue the conquest of the Crystal Empire. And I have succeeded, my lord. All the land in the north, from the Crystal Palace to Mount Everhoof, belong to our great empire. Silence and...
Morningstar immediately shut up. Gallus leaned towards, a murderous gaze contorting his already haggard features.
Equestria bled and cried for assistance while you enjoyed your folly in the north. This cannot go unpunished.
Morningstar didn't try to argue the point. He could see the regent wasn't remotely in the mood for a debate. Instead, he stamped his hoof on the floor twice.
Bring her in.
The door to the throne room swung open, and in strode 2 soldiers, each with a chain in their mouth, from which they dragged the last alicorn in Equestria. Seeing the surprise in Gallus' eyes, Morningstar allowed himself a small smile before daring to raise his head.
The Crystal Empire is no more, my lord. Without them, the Griffins will find no favor with the world for their war. The Yaks, the Hippogriffs and others will turn against them and join our side. In time, we shall push them back and reclaim every inch of land lost, then take much of theirs in recompense.
Playing on Gallus's greed worked wonders. The Griffin sank back into his throne and beckoned the princess closer with his claw. Dutifully, Morningstar's soldiers dragged her closer and pushed her towards the regent, obviously unwilling to get too close. Gallus reached out and gripped Flurry Heart's neck, softly squeezing until her eyes bulged, enjoying the look of terror on her tired face.
It's been too long, princess. You slipped from my grip once, but this time, it looks like no pony is coming to save you.
A grin cut across his beak, a twisted thing of pure evil that sent shivers running down her spine.
Take her to the dungeons. The era of the alicorn is soon to come to an end, permanently.
Dutifully, the soldiers dragged Flurry Heart away. The alicorn didn't resist or look up, preferring to stare fixedly at the floor. Gallus returned his gaze to Morningstar, who was relieved to see his mood had improved substantially.
As for you, I suppose there is little harm done. You are correct. Now that the Crystal Empire has been vanquished, the world will doubtlessly turn against the Empire.
He rose to his claws and swung his wings outward impressively.
Go and report to the war room for a briefing on the situation. There is much to be done.
A slow siren rang out its song as the ship came to dock against the port. 2 griffins approached, one clutching a lantern which he shone in the face of the figure descending from the ramp.
Password? Airmasby.
The pair visibly relaxed and stepped aside.
Welcome to Equestria.
Luster joined the ranks of the numerous griffins leaving the ship, her gait made awkward and unbalanced by Cozy clinging tightly to her forelock. The ocean was black as night beneath them, tossing and turning with force that threatened to swallow them whole. As they departed from the ramp, they were greeted by a small unknown town that had become a microcosm of an Equestria turned on its head. At first glance, little seemed to have changed. Ponies wandered the streets, but where once they had done so with a stride in their step and a smile on their face, now they walked with their heads lowered and eyes that darted back and forth. Griffin soldiers were scattered everywhere, glaring at passers-by as if they had personally wronged them. As 2 passed them by, Luster could feel Cozy cling ever tighter to her.
Golden Sun.
Luster spun around and was confronted with a barrel-chested griffin, with deep blue feathers and light yellow eyes, wearing a simple golden chestplate with a series of sparks embossed upon it.
Your Golden Sun. Correct. I was told to expect you tonight.
His eyes slid downwards and narrowed as he noticed Cozy Glow clinging to her hoof.
They didn't tell me you were bringing your brat with you. It doesn't matter. You can share a tent.
When Luster didn't respond, he slammed his claw down on the ground and snarled.
Pick it up. It's still a 3-hour train journey to your assigned camp, and I don't have all night to stand here and stare at your vacant expression.
Luster jumped, then frantically nodded, standing to attention.
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Next train to Dodge City. There's an army camp 3 miles northwest of the town, within seeing distance of Canterlot. When you're there, you do as you're told. When you're told. I'm sure you were spoiled rotten in the imperial court, but it's not like that in the army. Waste our time, screw anything up, put a filthy hoof out of line, and there'll be consequences. Yes, sir.
The Griffin turned away.
The station is just down that road. Get a move on.
Lester gave a small bow before heading off in the direction the Griffin had gestured. She was used to being treated roughly by the Griffins within the court, but she had no doubt the Griffin serving here would be 1,000 times worse. By her side, Cozy let out a deep breath.
You doing okay, Cozy? Yeah, I'm just getting used to all this. Don't worry, we'll be out of here soon.
Even as she spoke, the train station loomed in the distance, the main entrance blocked and guarded by 2 soldiers, one a Griffin and, surprisingly, one a pony. As they approached, the pony put out his hoof to stop her.
Name? Golden Sun. Hold on a second.
Turning around, he leaned into a sheet of parchment illuminated by a dying candlestick propped atop a barrel.
Fine in. Go ahead.
The remaining soldiers stood aside and allowed them to pass. The interior of the station was much the same, filled with soldiers with travel bags slung over their shoulders. A few of them glanced back at the pair of ponies in their midst, but none bothered to challenge them. The ticket booths were shut and windows smashed in, but it didn't look like any tickets were required for the services being run. Lester glanced up at the timetabled routes. The next service to Dodge City would be in 10 minutes. Platform 6. The train had already come into dock by the time the pair arrived. As soon as they had boarded, Lester collapsed into a nearby chair and felt her eyes fall like shutters. Cozy followed suit, looking slightly more relaxed now that the pair of them were alone together. Lester yawned and stretched her hooves.
Cozy? Yeah? I'm just gonna take a...
She stifled another yawn, eyes drooping.
A quick nap. Wake me up if anything happens, okay? Okay.
Cozy sounded unsure. Lester felt bad, but she was too tired to stay up for Cozy's sake. What was wrong with her? She'd never felt this tired before. Closing her eyes for the final time, she drifted off to sleep. Wait.
Hello, Lester.
Lester glanced around, eyes wide. The train had vanished, replaced with an ink-black void and a voice she knew all too well.
Discord.
The black void flashed white so quickly it made her head spin. Shutting her eyes tight and reeling backwards from the brightness, she glanced around and quickly spun to face the hazy dark figure approaching her. Groaning, she rubbed her head and blinked rapidly in an attempt to clear her vision.
You think you could warn me next time? I could, but that wouldn't be any fun, would it? Of course.
Lester glanced around, but wasn't able to see anything else of note.
Am I dreaming? I thought it the easiest way to conduct these little training sessions.
Discord snapped his fingers.
Princess Luna wasn't the only pony with the power to shape dreams. Tell me, how are you feeling? Fine?
Lester was confused.
Should something have happened? Why don't you try some magic? Try levitating yourself up into the air.
Lester had no idea what was happening, but she complied. The moment she did,
whoa!
She felt her body rocket upwards with only the slightest impetus, flying far higher than she had ever been able to take herself before. Struggling to control her flight, she eventually managed to descend relatively slowly by making tiny jerks of her horn. As soon as she found herself back on sweet solid ground, she collapsed in a wheezing pile before Discord, who looked positively overjoyed.
Oh, how wonderful. I did so hope that would happen. How do you feel? Not nauseous, I hope. You. How did you do that? Simple enough. My dream, my rules. You now have powers consummate with those I'd expect you to have when you take the magic from the bell. I want you to learn to control that magic before I turn it over to you. It would be something of a poor lookout if your first act with it would be to fling yourself 100 feet into the air and splatter against the ground like you would have just then.
Luster snarled.
Great. Thanks for the heads up. Think nothing of it. Now, let's try some curses.
Flurry didn't look up once as she was forced into the court dock. Before her stood an assembled panel of equestrian soldiers, headed by none other than the new general of the Aeon, P.
General Morningstar, please pass judgment.
Her trial had taken less than 5 minutes, and had consisted of her crimes being read out, and her lawyer making a feeble defense before sitting down and bowing his head, as if ashamed to have been seen defending her. All in all, it was more than she had expected.
Flurry Hart, you have been found guilty of treason, murder, warmongering, and other crimes too numerous to make this list. You have shown no remorse for your actions and have brought Equestria to a state of total war. For these crimes, you will pay with your life.
There was no reaction from the court, not even Flurry. She had expected nothing less.
Your execution will be scheduled for 3 weeks from now, to allow us time to gather further information as to the exact nature of the concordat agreed between your breakaway nation and the Griffins, and gather any further information we feel pertinent.
Flurry dared glance a look up at the word, catching sight of a burly stallion grinning sadistically in the corner. She wished immediately she hadn't. Once again, she looked away.
That is all. Do you have any words you wish to share with the court?
Flurry said nothing. Morningstar reached out and tapped the gavel beside him on the table twice.
May Providence have mercy on you.
This time, he didn't even bother hiding his smile. Victory was as sweet as ever. End of chapter.